right, welcome back to the debate between Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and our primary opponent, law professor Tim Canova. Professor Canova, let's start with you this time. I want to talk about the issue of drugs, and I want a criminalization of certain drugs, and that the goal should be to let adults make their own decisions as long as they are not harming themselves and others. Let states and their voters decide on their own drug policies. What drugs are you talking about that you'd be open to decriminalizing?
Well, certainly marijuana. That's the one that is sweeping this country in some states. I do think voters should decide that issue themselves.
What about other drugs like heroin or crack or methamphetamine?
I'll say even hard drugs like that should really be treated as a public health issue. It doesn't make sense to be taking addicts and locking them up and not treating the illness itself.
So you'd be okay if a community wanted to decriminalize a hard drug like heroin? That's their decision.
Well, I think we need to have a national policy on some of the hard drugs to make sure that we have the funds to treat it as a public health issue. And this has been the trend in many states, not just to decriminalize marijuana, but to try to start treating heroin addiction and cocaine addiction as public health issues. It doesn't make sense to be locking folks up for this.
Congresswoman, 2 years ago, you opposed and criticized the medical marijuana initiative that was on the ballot. Are you supporting the current initiative that's on the ballot?
Well, I look at this issue as from the standpoint of being a mom and a cancer survivor. Certainly as a mom, and I have 3 teenagers, so I want to make sure that that when we take a look at how we deal with marijuana policy, and I also support decriminalization. I don't think that we should be locking up people for small amounts of marijuana. Certainly dealers of large amounts of drugs should face prison time, but we need to make sure that we are investing in drug rehabilitation programs and diversionary programs.
But this medical marijuana initiative, are you supporting it?
And then as a cancer survivor, and I've talked to many cancer patients and parents of cancer patients. My friend Elaine Geller lost her daughter to cancer, and she benefited from the use of medical marijuana. But I'm continuing to take a look. The concern that I had in the last election was that, I'm glad to see that the supporters and the sponsors of that amendment have tightened it up a little bit to address some of the concerns about prior loopholes. We want to make sure that people who truly need it have the ability to get access to it.
What is it that you're waiting for before determining? Because it seems some people will accuse you of not wanting to state an opinion before your election for fear of alienating John Morgan or others who may come out against you.
I just recently voted to make sure that veterans have the ability to get access to medical marijuana. So I have a public position. I support the use of evidence-based medical marijuana, and I'm glad to see the Obama administration just made a decision to allow for more research to be done. I share President Obama's opinion that we need more research to make sure that medical marijuana is evidence-based so that we can make sure
you support medical marijuana as well.
I do. I support it.
What I don't support is legalizing drugs like heroin and other hard drugs. That's not responsible. It's dangerous.
Do you think what he was suggesting is irresponsible?
I think suggesting that legalizing hard drugs like heroin and methamphetamines is not a public health issue by any means.
There's a difference between legalization and decriminalization, and anyone who's been involved in the drug reform movement knows this. And what I'm saying is it shouldn't be criminalized. We should not be putting addicts in prison. That's very different from saying legalize the entire trade.
Let's turn to the economy.
Yes, please.
You support a $15 an hour federal minimum wage.
I do. I do think. I do think there should be some exemptions and subsidies for small businesses.
Tell me how we get there. How, as a member of Congress, because I think you'll have some opposition in Congress, how do you get that to pass if you're a member of Congress? How do we get to that $15 minimum wage?
Well, listen, there's a whole big agenda, a progressive agenda for jobs for all. It's going to take a lot of heavy lifting in Congress. It's going to take a lot of people speaking up and working hard behind the scenes. So, you tell me, how do you get to $15 an hour minimum wage? Anytime that there is
I'd be happy to tell you.
Every time, you've got to get it through committees, you've got to make the arguments to other members of Congress, and you've got to galvanize support, including among working folks. I've got the support of big unions that have backed me who want $15 an hour minimum wage. I'm sure that they'll be making the argument on Capitol Hill as well. Communication Workers of America, National Nurses United, plenty of labor folks, plenty of working folks want this. It's overdue to have a $15 minimum wage.
So how do you get it done?
You take a look at Walmart, for instance. Okay. This is a company that pays its workers so little that a big percentage of them are on food stamps. And where are they spending the food stamps? The largest recipient of food stamps is Walmart. while the Walton family becomes super rich, owns more wealth in the bottom half of America, and doesn't get very highly taxed on it either. Now, these are subsidies for wealthy folks. These are the arguments that have to be made. I don't hear my opponent making these arguments very much at all.
All right.
Well, then my opponent has just not been listening, because I have consistently stood up on behalf of the working people, stood side by side, fought side by side with the working people of this district, which is why I have the support of more than 50 labor unions, not only across this community and across the state, but across the country. I am a co-sponsor of the legislation that would create a $15 minimum wage. And Jim, what we need to do, you asked my opponent, how do you get this done? And he didn't have an answer for you because he's not quite sure. This is how you get it done. You reach across the aisle. Number one, you help make sure that we can take the majority back in the United States Congress, which is something that I have worked on for every year that I have been in Congress. I've supported and invested and campaigned for electing other Democrats, not just myself. I don't just focus on myself. I know that to advance our agenda, we have to be in the majority. My opponent just became a Democrat a year ago, and I have been a Democrat every year of my voting life. We also have to make sure, though, that we're reaching across the aisle. It's important, and I've made efforts to make sure that I could work with Republican colleagues.
Are you not too polarizing a figure, though, to be able to work with Republicans?
No, on the contrary. What I have done is I've made it a point, like, for example, starting a bipartisan dinner with my colleague, who I don't agree with on almost anything, Dan Webster, and regularly sitting down for no reason other than to get to know each other better at dinner with Republican and Democratic colleagues.
Thank you. I would like to get into this. I'll say this. The fact that somebody who was registered independent for 2 years, re-registered Democrat, does she want to grow the party? Does she want to invite independents to cross over and become Democrats? In the past 2 months, 3 months, we have attracted thousands of Republicans and independents who have re-registered Democrat to vote for me right here in this district. And she laughs and dismisses that. This party has to grow. While she's been in office, it gets smaller and smaller, and we lose more and more elections. I haven't seen her pick up a finger and help local Democrats running against Republican incumbents right here in South Florida.
So I think we should probably ask Mayor Judy Paul of the town of Davie whether I have lifted a finger to help Democrats, or Brian Koletka, or Nan Rich, or Marty Keir, who's running for property appraiser, and who I also helped get elected to the state house and to the county commission. There are countless Democrats, not only in Broward County, not only in Miami-Dade County, but across the state of Florida and across the country, who I have spent my time not only focusing on electing myself, but I've been in the trenches working hard to elect Democrats all across the country, including and especially helping to re-elect the first African-American president, Barack Obama, who I'm proud to have his support and the support of the next president of the United States.
But she's unable to talk about the historic losses in the House and Senate under her chairmanship.
Let's turn to Social Security. You've made Social Security an issue, and you've accused her, and this in one of your ads that you have running on TV says, "My opponent refuses to support an increase in benefits for Social Security."
That's right.
What's the basis for that, John?
Well, I'll say this. She put out a press release just a couple of days ago pointing to 6 bills and a House resolution that she has co-sponsored that would raise benefits, and I applaud her for that. You know, she co-sponsored these in June and July, 6 of the 7. Oh, 5 of the 7, excuse me. The other one was in April.
God.
Well, this is the truth. And I'll tell you this, there's the Supplemental Security Income Program administered by Social Security. It helps the poorest, neediest, struggling seniors and disabled folks all over the country. And in South Florida, in Miami-Dade and Broward County, that's 125,000 senior citizens and disabled who live on $11,700 a year or less.
So why do you think she would not support an increase?
She did not co-sponsor that bill. I published a piece in the Miami Herald a year ago calling on the Florida delegation to sponsor it. She still hasn't co-sponsored it.
Tim,
I've worked with folks. Excuse me. I've worked with folks in this community, Justice for Aging, for instance, who have lobbied her office, and they were told that bill doesn't stand a chance in the House because of Republican opposition,
Right.
and that's why we won't co-sponsor it. Elizabeth Warren authored and co-sponsored this legislation in the Senate. My opponent still won't co-sponsor it, and the 5 of the 7 bills that she is trumpeting, she sponsored in June and July.
Congresswoman?
Jim, the people who I have represented for all of these years, the 117,000 senior citizens, 90,000 of whom are on Social Security, many of whom only have Social Security as their sole source of income, they know that this argument is silly. They know that I've been on the front lines fighting day by day, side by side against Republican attempts to privatize Social Security. When George W. Bush was president, that was the mandate that he said he had after he was reelected. And he made it his mission to try to privatize Social Security. I stood in the breach over and over with my vote and my voice. I stood again and again, and I've co-sponsored countless bills, including a very important issue to our seniors, which is making sure that when it comes to a cost of living adjustment, which so many of my seniors have come to me and been concerned about the fact that they keep getting cut off from getting a cost of living adjustment, and that's because the formula, let me just finish this please, the formula that is applicable to whether a senior gets a cost of living adjustment is off. It doesn't measure.
All right, I want to bring him back in.
And
Yes,
I'm a
please.
co-sponsor.
Go ahead.
I'm a co-sponsor of the legislation that would change that formula so that we could make sure.
All right, let's bring Professor Canova.
And we've
cost of living
researched this.
adjustment.
She became a co-sponsor in June and July of 2016. That is the truth. You can look it up online.
My record
it's right
is
there.
very, very clear, and this is
Her record is clear that she.
argument
It's not
that is
silly.
completely.
You know,
Right.
to 125,000
The people that I
senior
represent
citizens,
know
to
better.
125,000 senior citizens in Broward County and Miami-Dade who are looking for an increase in their supplemental security income, it's not a silly argument. We've been waiting for Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz to co-sponsor this. She still hasn't done it. So, she came around and co-sponsored 5 pieces of legislation. They put it up online and patted themselves on the back. They should be thanking me for having a primary challenge to get her to get on the right side of that issue as well as payday lending.
Let's take a break here. We're going to come back. We got more issues to get to in the debate between Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Professor Tim Canova.
My father died when I was 10, and my mom worked full-time to raise us. I'm Tim Canova. With my mom's hard work and the help of Social Security, we managed to keep our home. So I'm committed to protect Social Security and Medicare and increase aid to our neediest seniors and disabled. My opponent refuses to support an increase in benefits. In fact, she's missed the most votes of any Florida Democrat. I'm Tim Canova, and I approve this message: to never forget my parents or yours.
Hi,